Welcome to Breaking the News Plus on this special edition from my desk on this, what will be Wednesday evening. Today, I'm going to talk to Mark Osler, a professor at the University of St. Thomas, who knows quite a bit about federal law. And we want to talk about the possibility that the suspect in assassinating the Hortman family is given the death penalty. And Mark, I know that you study this, so welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an important thing to talk about.
So the death penalty is not something we have in Minnesota, but with these federal charges, we were told by the U.S. attorney that the notice of special findings was filed on Tuesday, meaning that was the first step in seeking the death penalty, not meaning they will, just that they've taken that step. So can you make that make sense for our audience?
Yeah, that for it to be a capital case, there's additional things that have to be shown. And that's what they put in that part of the indictment that's titled Notice of Special Findings. It might be a placeholder that, if we get to that, we've already put the defense on notice of what it is we're going to put on the record to support the death penalty. But we're a long way away from that right now.
So, what happens from here? Because the US attorney said it's that first step. The decision won't come for several months, that it eventually would come from Attorney General Pam Bondi, but that other people would be involved in that decision.
Yes, that traditionally, and of course, we don't, with the Trump administration, there's a lot of things that are in flux and changing. But traditionally, death penalty decisions are advised on by a committee. And that committee has traditionally included people from the defense community, as well as, experienced prosecutors in the field and it convenes obviously within the Department of Justice. And that can take a while. So they'll study the case and usually make a recommendation. Now, I've heard that committee is still standing. And so that's probably what's going to take some of the time as they ponder this. Now, the fact that they put these special findings in the indictment, though, does raise the flag that this is a very strong possibility that they'll seek the death penalty here.
What kinds of things do they look for in that committee to say this reaches that level in under this Department of Justice?
We don't really know yet because there's not a track record. That we're going to have to wait until we see some outcomes for that to come out. I think that people are assuming, given the rhetoric of the administration during the campaign and after the campaign and while in office, that we're going to be seeing more cases where they're seeking the death penalty. Now, this is going to be an especially challenging one if they do, though. As you mentioned, we haven't had the death penalty here in 100 years. I think that as states go, we're a state where the population is probably more anti-death penalty than in, say, Texas. And that means that jury selection is going to become more difficult because you're going to have a higher percentage of people who have qualms about the death penalty.
Right. And when you speak of that, let's say that they decide to seek that, but that case is still going to be tried in the state of Minnesota. And so you're going to have a Minnesota jury. Is that what you mean?
Correct. Yep. And it's going to stay here. It's going to be in the District of Minnesota. So it's going to be Minnesotans that decide it. And it's going to be a rare exercise to see Minnesotans sitting in the box in a death penalty jury if it comes to that.
What kinds of jury instructions happen with a death penalty case?
They're quite detailed, but one of the things that we see with death penalty cases is that there is a the second phase. First the jury's going to decide guilt or innocence, and that's the jury that decides whether or not the death penalty is going to be imposed, and that opens up the relevance of what people can bring in about the defendant. We see a lot of mitigation in these kinds of cases from the defense. They'll talk about all kinds of influences and hardships that the person suffered. And that's very different than what we see in most cases.
So in this case, it would be a situation where it's almost like a mini trial after the trial. They could say, "Hey, he's guilty," and now we move to this second phase.
Yeah, and actually it's not even really a mini trial. It often is much more extensive than the trial itself. Because in death penalty cases, as in this case, there's often a lot of evidence that's going directly to guilt or innocence. And that can be cleaned up pretty quickly. And the real game is on the death penalty sentencing side.
So hypothetically, a jury could say, we believe Mr. Belcher is guilty as charged with all of these counts. But they could also say, but we do not support the death penalty, like we don't vote to send him to his death.
That's correct. And that happens quite frequently. Even in places like Texas, because the way that the constitutional requirements have come down, this two-stage operation where the jury is doing both is uniform in the states as well. And so in other places, we see it happening a lot. And it is quite common for a jury to say, this person is guilty of this heinous murder, but we're not going to find for death. We think that life in prison is an appropriate punishment.
In 2025, is it less common that juries support death as a penalty, or there's just not enough cases out there to say yay or nay either way?
Well, I mean, if we look at state cases across the country, we do see trends, and that there has been fewer decisions in favor of the death penalty across the country in the last 10 years than there were in the 10 years previous. We kind of had a peak around 1990. And since then, even in places like Texas, you've seen jurors shying away from imposing the death penalty at greater numbers.
Is that just, and I'm not speaking of this defendant, but is it just the idea that it's difficult for a juror? You can have it as a hypothetical in your mind, but it's if it's you in the jury seat saying, yes, I vote to send this person to their death, that's a heavy burden on a person.
It's an incredibly heavy burden. I mean, we pay these people $40 a day to sit 10 feet away from someone and decide whether they live or die. I went to a Baptist church in Waco, Texas. There were a lot of people in that church who had been on death penalty juries, and I talked to them about it. And it was incredibly, is equivalent to PTSD in some of them, I think, just having to make that decision. So yeah, it's a lot that we ask of those jurors.
How much input in a case like this, given your knowledge of it, would say John Yvette and Hope Hoffman have, or Sophie and Colin Hortman, the children of Mark and Melissa? Do they get to say, yes, we want you to do this, or no, we do not? And if they said, no, we do not, or yes, we do, does the prosecution go with what they want or go against what they want?
There are a lot of cases where you have forgiving victims' family members, and they often are remarkable people. That's something that many people would struggle with. But the prosecution isn't bound by their desires either way. And for example, in the murder at the Black church in South Carolina, in Charleston, there you had a lot of the victims' family members that didn't want the death penalty, and it was sought anyways by the prosecutors.
So they can give their input, but it doesn't guide the decision.
That's correct. Of course, they can also testify at the sentencing stage. If you have victims who are against the death penalty, one could even expect the defense to call them, and that happens. It's relatively rare, but it does happen. And that can be quite powerful to have, a child of the deceased, the person who was murdered, testify that they don't want the death penalty.
For the federal government to take this step with this notice of special findings and announce that they may seek the death penalty at some point, let's just have a hypothetical that the federal case comes first and a jury decides on the death penalty. Does that make the state case completely moot?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, there's sometimes a belt and suspenders approach where people are worried about an appeal on something. But if there is to be a finding of death here, I can't speak for the state actors, but it definitely would dissuade some people from going forward.
And the U.S. attorney from Minnesota said this could take months. Is that pretty accurate for them to come to the conclusion of what they will or won't do?
Absolutely. This is very serious business. And, you were asking previously about why we're seeing these lower numbers and in terms of executions in the United States and juries finding that way. One reason is better lawyering. Lawyers are better trained to handle death penalty cases, and there's better lawyers who do it. And, that matters too. And part of that is they're going to file motions. They're going to try to exclude evidence. They're going to fight every inch to save their client's life. And that's probably going to take some time.
If what do you foresee happening here? Is it pretty typical if they say we have this notice of special findings that they wish to pursue the death penalty, or is it just to give them the right to, or does it just suggest that they will?
It's hard to read, but I mean, I do expect that Pam Bondi and this particular administration is going to be inclined to seek the death penalty in cases that we didn't see with prior administrations. Certainly, we didn't see with the Biden administration, and that that comes with elections. And unfortunately, for those who are opposed to the death penalty in this state, that federal power extends over us here too.
I know previously in this case, the defendant has sought a speedy trial. Is that something that also works on the federal side?
Yeah, there's a Speedy Trial Act. It's actually fairly strict, but the Speedy Trial clock, as it's referred to, is told when there's motions pending. And in a case like this, there's going to be motions flying around for a while, and that's going to stop the clock. So, the normal 90-day window is really not what's going to be operational in a complicated case like this one.
Interesting. Well, Mark Osler, professor at the University of St. Thomas, thank you for joining me today to talk about this, as I'm sure we'll talk about it more and more in the weeks and months to come.
I hope we can. Thank you.
Thank you.